The Community Preservation Corporation is a not-for-profit lender that is a consortium of 70 banks and insurance companies from around the country. Well, excuse me, primarily from New York. But we work in neighborhoods that most people won't work in. So it's really good for banks. We throw all their money together in one place, and we loan in places where banks wouldn't like to loan. They get their Community Reinvestment Act dollars. They make their, everything that they have to do on that. At CPC, we're trying to stabilize neighborhoods. So what's a banker doing here talking about climates and building and behavior? Well, I'm not a banker. I work for a bank, and everybody tells me I cannot call myself a banker, everybody in the organization. I've been crawling through buildings for about 33 years. I started doing stuff in policy for the city of New York, the mayor's office. I went from there to housing, and then someone started talking about health and safety. I'm like, I can't do that stuff. Well, it's the most important thing we do. And then we went more into sustainability and durability. Now we have $60 million of Sandy money to spend. I've got to learn resilience. It's been kind of beaten into me for the last 3 years by people. So when I'm at a building, I spend about the same amount of time at the building, like dealing with the building data, as I do with the humans. I sometimes sit down with the humans at 10 o'clock in the morning and talk to them through lunch, because I want to find out what the owner, what the manager, what everybody else is doing in the building, because I find out that typically what the owner says, plus what the super says, plus what the manager says, plus what the occupants say, divided by 4 is pretty close to the truth. It's not really accurate, but it's off by a mile. So I want to talk to you today about some massive mistakes I've made over the years, and in doing them, how I learned to do things a little bit smarter. So I've been communicating with owners and building managers and practitioners for over 30 years, and sometimes it is like dealing with the Three Stooges. But owners want to know how objectively their buildings are doing compared to other buildings. If you tell them weird stuff, they don't want to know it. If you can tell them that their next door neighbor uses half the energy that they do, they get it. If you ask an owner what they want windows. I want windows, and I want cash. And you programs just give me the cash that I need, and I'll do the smart thing. Don't worry, I know. They also want solar panels, ground source heat pumps, windmills, and things that have a 10 to 900 year payback. And they don't want to focus on the stuff, the boring crap, what one person called it to me one time. So they need to be gently kind of walk through their buildings and say, oh, okay, we'll get you the solar panels, that's fine, at a building in Central Park South that faced north and had a 30-story building behind it. And the co-op board told me, I want solar and I want ground source heat pumps. I'm like, you've got steam. We've got to drill down to magma. Like, they don't get it. So we have to gently walk them around. So here's the feedback loop number 1. How are we doing? What are we using? What are we paying? And that's the graph that you have about Garrison. And it made me look really well. This is one of the largest owners of multifamily buildings in New York City. Each one of these is their building. Each bar represents a building, and that's BTUs per square foot per heating degree day. That's a geeky thing that tells you how much energy they're using per square foot. And if you took this, you see that some of them are up around 45 and some of them around 10. It's like there's a 4-to-1 difference in heating fuel usage, and this is in dollars. This is one of the largest owners of property in New York City, and each one of these is just their multifamily buildings. Who is this owner? If you know already, don't answer the question. Who is this owner? Guess. NYCHA. Good guess. Not correct. Where? What? I'm sorry? It's not the city of New York. You know the answer. Quit cheating. It is not related. How many people in this room went to Columbia University? Raise your hands. Raise your hands. This is Columbia University. These are their multifamily buildings that they get green plaques all over them saying how fabulous their buildings are. Their buildings are pigs because we looked at them. I have a mortgage officer in my bank that said to me, if you say BTUs per square foot per heating degree day to me again, I'm going to kill you. He said, my kids come home and they give me a report card. Give me a report card. Tell me how I'm doing. Give me a grade. And so we gave grades. And when we analyze a building's fuel use, we give them this. And it tells them their heating usage is here. Their heating usage is a C. Their fuel usage for hot water is a B. Their common area electric usage is a B. The water usage is a C. We're comparing them to thousands of similar buildings in New York City. And they get these grades and they say, why did I get an F? Because your building isn't doing well. Then we did benchmarking through the city of New York, local law 84. And this is the results from 150, 200 buildings. And guess what? It's just like a curve. There's not many A's, there's a bunch of B's, there's a bunch of C's, there's a few D's, and there's a bunch of F's. And this tells a building how they're doing. So unless you let them know how you're doing, they don't have that feedback loop. So feedback loop number 2, what goes on at a building in a typical day? Or, as I like to say, the beauty of an 8 a.m. building stroll with a clipboard when you have a 10 a.m. appointment with the owner. When I walk around a building 2 hours before the owner gets there and I've got a clipboard, everybody comes out to talk to me. Who are you? What are you doing here? What can you tell me? What's going on? The owner's a dirtbag. You hear everything. You hear about his wife. You hear about his father. You hear about his kids. You hear when the heat's off, what's going on. You get so much information. And I collect all the data from the building. I measure the building. I measure the windows. I see what's going on. Yeah, I see this. It's 20 degrees out, and not only is the window open, but there's a screen in it. I'm guessing they keep that window open a lot. These are the things you see. There's 6 inches of snow that fell last night, but it's already melted on the roof vents, which are, by the way, designed to vent insulation, which is stupid. It only is a hole at the highest part of the building and probably vents most of the heat out of the building. That's just physics, and I don't want to confuse us all with physics today. You go to this beautiful historic building in Brooklyn that was the original firehouse in Brooklyn that looked out over the entire borough to see if any buildings were burning down, and this beautiful historic building is completely falling apart. All of the roof is going, and nobody looked at that. You see a building, this is a beautiful building near Fordham University, but not only is the roof completely falling apart in this building, as you can see in the top, but again, cold winter day, all the windows are open on the top floor. People still have air conditioners installed in their apartments because that's the way they correct overheating, by opening the windows or turning on the air conditioner. Yeah, there's an emergency steam boiler in front of the room, in front of the building. They've been without steam, they've been without a boiler for 1.5 years and haven't fixed it. Yeah, that kind of jumps out at you. So here's the feedback loop number 3. Spend lots of time looking, talking to the staff, talking to the owner, talking to the tenants, talking to the manager, recording the data. But after you do something, get results. I was always so impressed with myself. Oh, we did such great work. And then you go back to the buildings 3 years later, we saved nothing. Well, why did we save nothing? We have to go back and find out. So these are some buildings I want to show you quickly. This is the Syracuse Housing Authority. This ain't rich folk. And we walked through this building with the Syracuse Housing Authority staff, crack staff. And I don't mean smoking crack. I mean really, really good at what they know. And this is a 2-city block that has big towers in it and little low-rise buildings and old furnaces and old hot water heaters. So we started walking around and seeing what we wanted to do. So of course we're going to do new furnaces, sealed combustion, new hot water makers, sealed combustion, wall insulation only in this upper part of the building. A person from the state came through because I saw this part of the building and it's brick. And I assumed that this was brick behind, and they said, no, no, it's frame behind there. So we insulated the upper half of the building. Maybe it's not perfect. We air sealed the attics. We added insulation there. Again, this building is master metered for gas and electric for the entire block. So we don't know how individual buildings are doing. But we saw a 26 to 41% reduction in non-heating usage and a 23% reduction in heating usage in these buildings, doing a pretty inexpensive retrofit. People tell me you can't do anything with historic buildings. This building was built in 1873. It's an engineering school just south of, oh, well, it was an engineering school built by a guy from Wall Street. For the record, people from Wall Street can't run schools. This engineering school went under in about 20 years. And everybody that grew up in this town went to 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade in this building. It's beautiful. But the attic had never been insulated, ever. So we walked up into it, and I thought that the New York Ballet Company had been through it because it didn't have blown insulation, it had thrown insulation, just in places wherever they wanted to go. So we had the attic air-sealed and insulated for the first time, and we replaced these boilers, which are called atmospheric gas boilers, which were designed by Satan himself. And whenever you see them, take them away, and that's an atmospheric gas hot water heater, also designed by Satan, still specified by engineers, and take them away. And we got 20% savings in this building by changing the boilers, insulating the attic, and walking away. And the historic preservation people said, you're not touching anything that makes us unhappy. You're fine, go. They were perfect with us. So historic buildings work. Electrically heated, multi-family buildings, cold climate. Remember, nobody here, Jonathan remembers this. Remember when they told us that electricity was going to be too cheap to meter? Well, they were wrong. So there's electrically heated buildings all over the United States. And this one had only gas for hot water, and they had this hot water maker, which was designed in 1940 and still used today. And one of them died, and they put the exact same one in because the rule is, in HUD and many other groups, replace with same. And it's like when you get the new iPhone comes out, do you get rid of your phone and get a rotary phone? Is that cool? So I want people to start looking at like the coolest thing to put in. And we went from this water heater up here in the upper right corner to the super efficient ones in the bottom right corner. 46% reduction in gas in 1 month. And all we did was those two boilers, shower heads, and aerators. That's it. And we had a 21% reduction in water, and we didn't do toilets. Okay? That's big money for this building. We went in and we put a blower door on every apartment, and we tightened every apartment on average by 25%. Their electric bills went down by 25%. Now, I asked the inventor of the blower door, Gary, can we say that reducing air leakage by 25% saves 25%? And he said, of course you can. And his scientific person next to him said, no, you can't say that. That's complete BS. Don't say that. But it makes a difference. I work for a bank. This is a refi. This is a refi job on a walk-up 1920 building in Upper Manhattan, and we brought the local weatherization agency in, the greatest weatherization agency in all of the United States. The greatest weatherization director, his name's Dan Reber, Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation. And they walked through, and while we were doing the checkerboard rehab, they air sealed the apartments, they put a new boiler in, they put new windows in, they were installed right, they weren't cheap windows. I gotta show you this, because it's a real number. Heating and hot water fuel declined by 63.7%. In dollars, the building went from $119,000 to $43,000, or a savings of $76,000, over $2,000 an apartment on a $4,000 per apartment investment. If this wasn't a weatherization job, it would be called a deep energy retrofit. It was a refi. And I work for a bank, and we think it's a really smart idea that when you refinance the debt on a building, that's the time you make the plan to do the energy stuff. Because that's when the wallet is open. When the wallet is open, do it. But I don't want to talk about those buildings. I want to talk about the Auburn Housing Authority. And Auburn, New York is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's in the middle of nowhere between Syracuse and Rochester, New York. It's gorgeous. And we walked through the buildings at the Auburn Housing Authority, and there were the original furnaces. They weren't hooked up to the return ducts at all. but they were hooked up to the supply duct. So they sucked air from the basement. They probably also sucked carbon monoxide and delivered it to people, but that's just technical stuff. Who cares? This is, if you look in there, that's the pilot light for this thing. I could have lit 3 cigars at once with that pilot light. It's gigantic. And the buildings were built in, there's an architecture style, it's called early modern Eisenhower bomb shelter. That's this right here. Those of you that are elderly architects, you're responsible for this, and I don't forgive you. And now, 2 days after a rainfall, I went into a lot of basements and saw wet basements. Well, upstate New York, I went to school at Syracuse, it's wet up there. Does anybody see something here that makes you think why you have wet basements? Anything that jumps out at you? See this? The buildings don't have gutters. Nobody ever put them on in 55 years. Come on, that's easy. Even I can figure that one out. So we wanted to do gutters. At 188 units, 31 buildings, but 1 gas meter, 1 electric meter, 1 water meter. And we put together what else was wrong at the building? 20% vacancy in a place that desperately needed affordable housing. Well, why was it 20% vacant? The place was a mess. Their bills were a third, their energy bills were a third of all their financing. They were supervised by both HUD and the New York State Division of Housing, and neither one gave them subsidies. So they had to jump through all the hoops with none of the money, literally zero. The 1950 furnaces didn't have parts anymore, so they couldn't find them. And the maintenance staff spent a large part of their time making parts for these 50-year-old furnaces to make them work. And again, extremely low rents and 20% vacancy. This is as big as I could make this. But our scope of work, this was a weatherization job. We had a weatherization, we were a bank that ran a weatherization program when the ARA funding came in. So we said, add gutters, replace 9 of the roofs because 9 of the roofs were leaking, reconnect the ductwork, change the shower heads, refrigerators, apartment bulbs, new furnaces, hot water heaters. And those of you that know cost effectiveness with weatherization, we just got in their savings to investment ratio of 1.1, investing $900,000 to replace 181 furnaces and 181 hot water makers. Here's the scary thing. I finished the audit, and the building is actually pretty efficient. It was running at about 12 BTUs per square foot per heating degree day, but they told me we were going to reduce the heating usage by 50% and the hot water usage by 40% by doing these things. And I would not show these numbers to my supervisor because he's not with the company anymore. Because if we didn't reach those numbers, he was going to fire me. And he told me that. Because this is energy stuff. You can just do it. It's easy. There's no missing. So I was panicked. The roofs were in terrible condition. And HUD wouldn't let the Housing Authority release the money that they had to replace the roofs. So we went to HUD's office in Buffalo, New York, and we said to him, okay, you either allow them to use the money that they have put aside to replace these roofs, or they will lose $1 million. They wrote the letter in 2 weeks. That's a record. For those of you that work with HUD, that's record time. So we said, it's either $1 million or nothing. You decide. And they moved. Now I want to talk to you about the excellent feedback loop that many of you don't do. I hope many of you do. But it's called the pre-bid conference. And we put out this meeting, and the only people that showed up were local contractors from less than 20 miles away, all of whom did furnaces and hot water heaters because they were just like houses, except there were 181 of them in one place. And we were all paying one bill. And one of the guys that's in the construction companies, the HVAC company, said, what the hell are you doing putting in a separate hot water heater for everybody? Why don't you put one for every 2 apartments? You're going from a 50% efficient hot water heater to a 92% hot water heater. You can do it for half the money. And we're like, Bingo. Saved us a ton of money. So we split a water heater per every other apartment. And the beauty of this was that because we hired a local contractor, we put business back in Auburn, New York, which desperately needs it. And the crews that they would normally lay off in the summer when they're busy, when they're not busy, they hired extra crews on. So we kept the city of Auburn busy in heating for the summer. That was good. We replaced all the furnaces, every hot water heater, 19 roofs, lighting and refrigerators. We documented 26% reduction in heating usage and 54.8% reduction in hot water and stove. We averaged out at about that 40-50% number for gas savings. But this was, during this retrofit, the vacancy rate went from 20 to 3%. It's 0 now. So with the building getting more crowded, we still had great savings. This is like such a home run. Here's the feedback loop number 4. Good dog. Good dog. You don't get these very often. This is a 2-page letter from the Auburn Housing Authority praising us to the nines, talking about how we changed the way they managed, how it got back into the community, how they did things differently. We feel that we've been able to restore the truth of both of our residents and community, the trust of both our residents and community. Though we've always been responsive, it's extremely difficult to address common complaints with limited resources. While this will remain a challenge, we have now demonstrated our willingness to and ability to improve our housing. This changed a housing authority with $4,000 a unit. Gotcha. Feedback loop number 5, and the most important one. We got to fertilize the fields behind us. My best mentor is a guy named John Tooley. In 1998, he told me we have to fertilize the fields behind us, and I'm like, what do you mean? He said, I'm going to be dead in 20 years, and nobody's going to do my work. And nobody's going to be doing our work in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So last year I was here, and I work with a group called the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. I'm on their board, and also Green Home NYC, which BOMI started, and I'm on their board. And I think the most important stuff we do there is pick up the kids and teach them how to do this stuff. Because if we don't grab the kids and help them get a job and make them better at what they do, we're dead. So last year I was here, stand up, would you? And I met somebody who was washing dishes on the side and working like a dog and then running in here and taking notes at 100 miles an hour. And I said, this is Andrea, by the way. And I said, who are you? You can sit down now. I'm done making fun of you. Okay. And, oh, I'm a multifamily building auditor. No, you're not. I'm a multifamily building auditor. We talked for a little while, and within 2 months, she had a job with Jeff over here. And I know that she's really good at what she does because a few months later, Jeff just came to me out of the blue and said, thanks for sending us Andrea. She's great. Elizabeth, will you stand up? Last year, one of the kids I helped get a job 3 years ago came to me and said, you gotta hire her, you need an intern. And I'm like, who? This kid who comes to an office dressed to a T, who's smart and really, really, like well presented in everything she does? She wouldn't crawl through a building. But she became an intern with us, and 5 departments in the company can't live without her. She's a full-time employee now because we just pushed her in a couple directions, and she pulled it in. Can we give a hand to little Elizabeth here? Now, when my friend John told me we have to fertilize the fields behind us, I found out the hard way. That means you got to crap on them a little bit, too. You got to ride them rough. Did I ride you rough? Did I ride you rough? Not much. You got it pretty well. Come here, Erica. Come here, please. 6 years ago? I used to work for Stephen Winter Associates, and 6 years ago, Erica came to a picnic for Stephen Winter Associates. She didn't come as an employee. And sometime in the middle of a drunken stupor, Stephen wrote, this is a true story, Stephen wrote a job offer to her.
Dominique was there.
Stephen wrote a job offer to her on the back of a cocktail napkin.
Which I still have.
Oh, you do? And I wasn't there that day, but he hired her for me. And she had no background in doing multifamily building energy auditing at all, and I desperately needed an auditor. To this day, the finest employee I've ever had in my life, and you'll see when she speaks tomorrow, knows more about health and safety than anybody that I know, and is a great presenter.
Thank you.
Thanks, honey. That's our most important feat, to bring the kids up. Because if we can't bring them along and make them better at what we do, and teach them the whole time that we're doing this, and tell them to stop making the mistakes that we made 30 years ago, and don't reinvent the wheel. Do stuff that's really simple first. Do the caulking, do the air sealing, do the easy stuff, look at the bills, find out what's wrong, and then fix them. Thank you.